All right, let's jump right in. So, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear Tasmania? You're probably picturing, huge stretches of wilderness, maybe some cute little historic towns, and you're not wrong, but that's really just scratching the surface. In this explainer, we're going to go way deeper because Tasmania is, honestly, one of the most contradictory places on the entire planet. It's this island of shocking extremes that, believe it or not, holds some pretty big lessons for all of us. First, you have this side of the story, the Tasmania you see on postcards, right? It's a place of just breathtaking beauty, where you can literally see the southern lights dancing over these perfect, pristine lakes. Get this, there's a remote station called Cape Grim, where scientists actually bottle the air. Why? To set the baseline for the entire planet's atmosphere. Yeah, it's considered the purest air in the world. And then you have this, the hills around a town called Queenstown. For 100 years, the fumes from copper smelting just killed everything. Every single plant. It created this bizarre, totally alien moonscape. And that is the paradox of Tasmania in a nutshell, a place of staggering environmental purity sitting right next to these deep, deep scars of its industrial past. To even begin to understand how this could happen, we have to think differently about time. We need to think in deep time. Because what we're about to see is a collision. The collision of one of the world's oldest continuous cultures with one of its most recent and brutal invasions. You see, for over 40,000 years, the indigenous Palawa people didn't just live on this land. They actively shaped it. They used a technique we now call fire stick farming, which was a system of controlled, low-intensity burns. Now, this wasn't just simple slash and burn. No. It was this incredibly sophisticated system that created grasslands, it managed animal populations, and it sustained the whole environment for millennia. Just look at that timeline. Seriously, over 40,000 years of sustainable management on one side, and then, in 1803, this happens. On the scale of human history, the entire colonial era is just this tiny, violent blip. But man, in that blip, absolutely everything changed. The island, which was then called Van Diemen's Land, was basically turned into a giant open-air prison for the British Empire. And they built these brutal places, like the Cascades Female Factory, in damp, cold, unsanitary swamps. Convict women and their children were locked up here in just horrific conditions, punished not only for crimes, but for what were seen as moral failings, like being pregnant and unmarried. And here's what that brutality looks like as a number. By 1838, the mortality rate for children inside that factory was over 26%. Let that sink in. More than 1 in every 4 children died there. That 40,000-year harmony was just shattered by a system that treated human beings as completely and utterly disposable. Okay, so this leads us to our next big paradox. For most of its history, Tasmania was one of the most isolated places you could find. So how on earth did an island so cut off from everything end up having such a massive, outsized impact on the rest of the world? Well, first, let's just get a sense of the space here. Tasmania is way bigger than a country like the Netherlands, but it has about 30 times fewer people. So you'd expect it to be a quiet, maybe even overlooked backwater, right? Well, you would be totally wrong. Because out of this isolation came some pretty extraordinary innovation. The massive fight to save its wilderness from being dammed, well, that led to the creation of the world's very first green political party all the way back in 1972. Today, Tasmania produces about half of the world's legal opium for medicine. It generates 100% of its own electricity from renewables, and it's home to a truly world-famous art museum. And that museum, Mona, is the perfect example. It was built by a professional gambler, of all people, and he calls it a subversive adult Disneyland. Before Mona, Tasmania was kind of the butt of jokes in Australia. After Mona, it suddenly became this global cultural hotspot, completely reshaping the island's identity from the outside in. Which brings us to our final and maybe the most crucial point. There's this idea that Tasmania's history of deep, deep trauma hasn't just left scars. It's actually forged a unique and almost shocking ability to radically transform itself when it's faced with a crisis. In 1996, Tasmania went through one of its absolute darkest moments, the Port Arthur massacre. The trauma was just immense, but the response was immediate. It was decisive. In the wake of that tragedy, Australia, led by this groundswell that really started in Tasmania, passed some of the strictest gun control laws in the world. It was a rapid pivot that so many other nations have failed to make. And look at this shift. It's staggering.
In the early 1990s, Tasmania had the harshest anti-gay laws in the entire Western world. Being gay was a crime, punishable by 21 years in prison. And yet, within a single generation, the state did a complete 180, becoming the very first parliament in Australia to vote in favor of same-sex marriage. It's almost like a society forged in extremes can only react in extremes. Its past trauma seems to fuel this urgent need to reject old identities and redefine its own future.
So, from the deep scars of its convict past, its industrial exploitation, and all its social conflicts, something else has emerged, something uniquely resilient. A complex identity that doesn't try to hide its dark chapters, but actually seems to be forged by them. When you step back, it really is the ultimate island of contradictions. It's where 40,000 years of culture collides with subversive modern art. It's where the devastation of drowning a lake for hydro dams gave birth to the global green movement, and now those same dams power a 100% renewable grid. Which leaves us with one last big question. When we look at this incredible, turbulent journey of trauma, resilience, and radical transformation, is Tasmania's story a warning of what can be lost, or could it actually be a blueprint for how a society can face its darkest moments and somehow forge a better future? That's something to think about.